fella. Good to see you.
Hello, welcome everybody. If you can get a seat, we'll get started right away. Well, welcome. My name is Charlie Moore. I'm with Lexington Global Warming Action Coalition and Sustainable Middlesex, and I'm delighted to see so many of you out here already. And how many towns are represented? And let me just see if I have this right. I know we have Arlington, Belmont, Bedford. You folks from Bedford? Okay, because I know they're usually here. We'll move Bedford.
We'll leave it up because they might come in.
Because I know they're usually here. Concord, Carlisle, Medfield, Lexington, Lincoln, I'm pretty sure, Marlborough, Wellesley, Winchester, Weston. Oh, we do have, that's right. We do have Weston, Watertown. Did the Watertown folks make it today?
I haven't seen a water.
Wayland. Do we have someone from Wayland today? In the past. Okay.
You don't have Newton up there?
Newton, we have Newton, okay. What other towns?
Walpole.
Waltham?
Walpole.
Walpole, great.
Sudbury.
Sudbury? Excellent.
Cambridge.
Harvard.
Cambridge.
Cambridge, excellent, Cambridge.
What was that last one before Cambridge? Sudbury and what?
Harvard.
Harvard.
And from the longest away.
Yeah, Seccong. Excellent. And the organization, did we have another? Sorry? I didn't hear that. Oh, great. And some of the other thing that really excites me are the different organizations that are here. Of course, in almost every town mentioned, there's an organization like Sustainable Winchester, Sustainable Arlington, etc. But I know we also have, this meeting is not just Sustainable Middlesex, but it's a joint meeting with the Climate Exchange and the Citizens Climate Lobby. And to me, that's what's really important, is to bring different organizations together. And I think we have folks from others out front here too. Yeah, and other organizations like that have shared. Yes.
350 Mass.
350 Mass, of course. Yeah. So to me, that's what's really exciting and powerful about it, is when we can all come together to address these issues. Just as a little background for those of you who may not be familiar with Sustainable Middlesex, Sustainable Middlesex is a coalition of local grassroots organizations from really all around. And our goal is to be a conduit for those organizations so that they can share experiences with one another and get together to address issues that are broader than just on a town basis. By the way, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. And today we're going to cover an issue that's local to one town, which I think other people will really benefit from, and that's going to be Mark Sandian's conversation. But then most of it is to discuss the implementation of pricing carbon, what some people will call a carbon tax, a revenue-neutral carbon tax, or a fee and rebate system. And the term is really politically charged, so it's hard to figure out what's the best way to describe it. But I think I'll call it putting a price on carbon for today. And to me, this is a really important time for all of us to come together, because those midterm elections were really challenging to those who care about the environment and climate change. And so I think with that behind us, we also have 2014 being the hottest year ever recorded. And we also have more people aware of climate change and more people interested in the government doing something about it. So I think it's a really important time to come together. And what excites me so much being here in Massachusetts is having State Senator Mike Barrett. Sound like there he is back there. We are so fortunate to have such a passionate, intelligent, and competent leader to guide us here and to move legislation forward. So I think that makes this a particularly wonderful combination. So Now it's really the time for all of us to come together, collaborate, and figure out what do we have to do to get this price on carbon passed in Massachusetts. And you know, what's kind of amazing to me is if we can get this passed in Massachusetts, just like universal health insurance, just like same-sex marriage, it could easily go to the rest of the country. And if it goes to the rest of the country, it'll be a model for the world. So think of it, this group, we might be starting that right today. I mean, it's kind of amazing. All right, so with that background, let me talk a little bit about the agenda. And we want to start, as I said, I'm changing it a little bit, and then I'd like to have Mark Sandine talk about what he and a couple of his colleagues have done in Lexington to have the town commit to put solar panels on every single appropriate building in Lexington. And how does a citizen get a town to switch like that? This Mark, I'm going to limit Mark to just 10 minutes, but he'll be back in February to give a longer one for people who want more information on that, and we can also connect with him after this. But then after that, we're going to go to Mike Barrett, who will give us an update on where he sees the legislation in preparation for submitting new legislation, and talk a little bit about our strategy. And then after that, we're going to have Jessica Langerman talk about implementing some of that strategy, especially in approaching town Democratic Committee and her success in Wellesley, followed by Zori Zimmerman, who has had similar experiences there, and she and Jessica have been working to get the word out and get the legislation moving forward. And I'll give a little more of an introduction later on. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and Mark, if you could start us off. Thank you.
Sure thing, Charlie. Thank you for having me here. I'm the chair of Sustainable Lexington in Lexington here, and we at Sustainable Lexington formed a group called the Solar Task Force that put 1.1 megawatts of solar on our rooftops here in this building and 5 other buildings in town. So that we're going to be turning the switch on probably at the end of December. We formed a group called the Solar Task Force. With us here today is Dan Voss from Lexington, who is the chair of the Solar Task Force. So let me give you a little bit of an overview. I'm being told I need to talk louder.
Use the mic.
Where's the mic?
It's in front of it. Little thing there.
Ah, okay, is that helpful?
Not working.
There's something that's hanging off on the other side. Look to your left. No, on the podium. Is that a cable?
Look to my left.
Is that a cable or is that just?
No, this is a HDMI.
Can you turn it on here?
Is that better? The on switch.
Radical.
All right. So, give you a quick overview of the solar industry. Most people know that the solar industry is growing incredibly rapidly. Most people don't know how rapidly that is. If you look at this graph here, what you'll see is that in the last 15 years, we are putting up in 2014 1,000 times more solar in 2014 than we put up in 2000, 100 times more than in 2004. If you just go back to 2011, it was a record year. We had about 2 gigawatts of solar put up in the United States. We're 3 times that. We're going to be 6.5 gigawatts of solar in the United States. And the reason is that solar prices are coming down. Efficiency is going up, reliability is getting better, longer life on the solar. There's a lot of good reasons why solar is actually, if you look at the rates in Massachusetts, you'll see that solar is now crossing over in terms of rates in Massachusetts. And so what you find is, so that was the national numbers. In Massachusetts, there are almost every community in Massachusetts has solar installed. And about 120 municipalities out of the 351, so about a third of the municipalities in Massachusetts have put solar on their municipal buildings. And what we're here to talk about today is how do you do that yourself? And so let's talk about Lexington. I mentioned that we've just put solar on the library here and 5 other municipal buildings, including the high school, one of the middle schools, and a bunch of our elementary schools. It works out to about 1.1 megawatts, and And Charlie was suggesting to me that nobody knows what 1.1 megawatts means. So if you take it in terms of the average power of an average Massachusetts house uses in the course of a year, it's the equivalent of powering 176 houses in Massachusetts, this one project. And what it does is it results in $5 to $6 million in savings for the town. And I see Joe Pato here as our chair of the Board of Selectmen in Lexington. He's a liaison to the Sustainable Lexington Committee, and his support has been absolutely critical in terms of us being able to make this occur in Lexington. It turns out this is the second largest municipal rooftop system in the state of Massachusetts. So if we come back in February, what we'll talk about is the process that we went through with the Solar Task Force in Lexington to make that happen. I think it's repeatable. And we are now going through this on our ground mount, as a ground mount opportunity. There's a landfill, closed landfill in Lexington on Hartwell Avenue. We're now exploring the potential for that. It could be 1.75 to 3.5 megawatts of ground mount potential, enough for another 290 to 584 homes. And we think, because ground mount is more financially viable than rooftops, it's cheaper to put it in on ground mount, we can see somewhere between $9 to $30 million in savings for the town. So this is a win-win. You're doing something good for the environment and doing something good economically. And what we're going to be talking about in February, Charlie mentioned that we're going to be talking about the process.
February 12th,
February 12th.
7 to 9 in this room.
In this room at 7 p.m. So mark your calendar, February 12th, 7 p.m. And there's a bunch of steps we're going to be talking about how you can get started in your town, how you form a team, how you engage stakeholders, the process of building credibility and momentum, planning how this works from a technical perspective, planning from a permitting process. And then there's a lot of interesting things to learn about procurement, vendor selection, and how you negotiate with these vendors, and finally securing approvals from the town and getting installation. Each one of these things are critically important, but we've developed a process that we think works well in Lexington, and we think will also play well in other communities in Massachusetts, which results in something like this. You get a view that you can show the town. There's your economic benefits from a number of different scenarios, from a very conservative scenario to a very aggressive scenario. And what you see here is $5 to $6 million worth of economic benefit for the town and about $2 million of health benefits for the town. And a lot of people would ask, why now? Why should we be doing solar now? As I mentioned before, solar is growing rapidly. There's a lot of very excellent vendors, reliable products, and fabulous successful projects that you can model. And it's possible now for towns to capture the solar benefits without any capital investment from the town, just savings. But the interesting thing is that these favorable policies and incentives will not last forever. That's why it's critically important that you get started now. So if you're in your town looking at electricity prices that look something like this, these are the prices in Lexington over the past 25 years, and saying how can we be doing something good for the environment and good for the economies of our local towns, come here on February 12th at 7 p.m. We're sponsored by Sustainable Middlesex and Lexington GWAC, and there's a couple pictures of us putting the solar on Harrington School, and this is the library. This is us putting the solar on this building in the library here. So thank you very much.
It's just been fabulous what Mark and his team have done, and that it can be done everywhere. And you don't have to do it to save the planet. You can do it to save money for the town. So it's a fabulous win. Mark is also looking into putting panels at our recycling center and then even a community solar garden. So the other efforts he's going in are fabulous. Two other things that I want to mention. First of all, I want to thank the Food Link, which brought the food for us today. And I want to thank Fran Ludwig and Lexington GMAC for the coffee. I also really want to welcome the Belmont Science class. It's great having younger folks here with us, too. All right, so let's get in now to the main part of the program. And Mike, if you could come up and give us an update on the legislation again. I think, excuse me, I think we are so fortunate here in Massachusetts to have Mike Barrett as our state senator and as leading the effort. Mike?
Thanks very much, Charlie. This is an amazing gathering for Sustainable Middlesex. We're busy, of course, redefining Middlesex and the historic boundaries of Middlesex County. We've always had a secret plan to annex Wellesley. Where's Jessica? There. Oh, okay. Yeah. We're confessing it. She's helping, but now we're moving towards Seacombe and Brookfield. So we're just feeling our oats. This drive to put a price on carbon knows no limits. I'm the state senator for 9 towns out of a whole bunch in Massachusetts, 351. And I owe a debt of gratitude to the 9 communities who early on mustered people to come to meetings of Sustainable Middlesex, because the issues raised here as we've been bouncing strategic and tactical choices involving pricing carbon, bouncing it back and forth among all of us, have caused me to change my thinking on some major aspects of this campaign. And I hope today's meeting gives you guys the chance to give me additional feedback. It was here that we started talking about whether to call this thing a tax or a fee. And I was leaning early on, until I got feedback from people in this room, towards calling it a tax. British Columbia makes no bones about its particular approach, calls its levy on carbon a tax. There was a kind of a truth in advertising and transparency thing that was extremely appealing to me early on. But still, people here in Sustainable Middlesex pushed back, had convincing counter-arguments, and I've changed. And I would have felt uncomfortable about changing had I not uncovered a legal analysis of what a tax is. And I think that analysis may have been sent to me. Actually, I guess it was by Mark Breslow, a resident of Arlington. A key component of a tax, classically, according to the legal text, is that the revenues collected from this exaction go to pay for the operations of government. And Supreme Court, state Supreme Courts at least, legal treatises, I don't know if the U.S. Supreme Court is tangled with the question, have used this issue of where the money goes and what it pays for to denominate a tax from something else. There are legal implications for this movement, right? Because the T word is wildly unpopular, and immediately, while there's something to be said for transparency, touches off all kinds of emotional reactions. As we currently contemplate drafting new legislation for 2015-2016, the money would not go to fund the operations of government. It would go back to the consumers of Massachusetts and to the businesses of Massachusetts in proportion to their place as sources of the original revenues. So if we're going to cycle the money back, just like the Alaska pipeline levies are cycled back to the citizens of Alaska, then technically, truly, legally, this is not a tax. Now, there are reasons why it's not exactly a fee either. It is, as we lawyers say, sui generis. It's a hybrid, something almost unique, but it does not meet the legal definition of tax. And as we go forward within the legislature to draft a bill for next year, we are realizing that this is not a tax in the classical sense, and we're treating it accordingly. That's going to have all kinds of messaging implications for the organizing that you do. I think it is a good thing, and I'm relieved that I got over the hump because I was hung up on wanting to be as honest as possible, and now I can be both honest and smart. as opposed to ordinarily we politicians make a choice of either being. But this is one of those rare instances where there's perfect convergence. Speaking of drafting the bill, I want to introduce two members of my staff who are here. Brendan Berger, who's from Boston. You know, the appropriation of Boston into Middlesex County, that will be one of the last meetings. That's dicey. You know, they've got a strong mayor and all that. And Sam Anderson, bred and educated in Lincoln, Massachusetts, in my legal counsel. Sam worked for Tom Conroy, the state rep with whom, and Sam drafted the first iteration of a carbon tax 2 years ago. So we're delighted. Tom ran for state treasurer. You don't get to remain in the state legislature and go statewide, so he is rotating into what we in the State House sometimes call the dreaded private sector. It's good for shaping character, though. I come from the dreaded private sector. It didn't do me any harm. But we're delighted to have Sam having moved over. Here's where we are. First of all, this is, the size of this meeting is a testament to the velocity of this idea. This is the largest meeting, I think, of the ones that I've attended on carbon pricing, called by Sustainable Middlesex. And there is, I don't need to tell you, genuine interest nationwide and statewide. There is a kind of convergence on the part of liberals, middle-of-the-roaders, and even conservatives that as we acknowledge, and maybe for some conservatives it's a grudging acknowledgement, as we acknowledge that the planet's heating up and that human beings are the primary movers, we have to do something. Carbon pricing. See, you got to help me. I'm a recovering person in terms of my vocabulary. Carbon pricing seems to be the idea on which all sides can agree because of the flexibility involved. But here's where we are precisely. We're going to have a very good bill that I think incorporates a lot of feedback from folks like you. On the other hand, we are still right at the cusp of driving this idea into consciousness, either in the State House or in the general public. We really are. I don't want to mean this in a bad way, but we're right at the beginning. It is safe to say that most of the 160 state reps in Massachusetts and almost all of the 40 state senators haven't had a single constituent approach them in favor of carbon pricing. I think that's really going to change in the next 24 months. Not because of the bill we're going to submit, although it's going to be, I think, a very good piece of legislation, but because we really are just approaching takeoff in terms of this concept. We've got to drive it through Middlesex County, broadly defined, spiritual Middlesex County, and then to the rest of Massachusetts, and ultimately out to the region and to the Northeast. One of these days, there'll be national carbon pricing and international carbon pricing. But let it start here.
Yes, sir.
In terms of the grassroots organizing, we're at an interesting juncture. Some serious foundation money is finding its way to Massachusetts and to a handful of other states. What are the 4 states, sorry, Jessica?
Vermont, Washington, and Oregon.
So 2 on the West Coast. Vermont and Massachusetts in New England have been given serious funding by the Educational Foundation of America. We just checked their website. No announcement formally yet of the funding, but we're reasonably sure it's happening. I'm meeting with another officer of a foundation next week, so there's clearly a lot of interest in what we've begun here. This money is not for legislators, and it's not immediately, correct me if I'm wrong, for legislative action. It's to build a consensus in support of legislative action. So it's grassroots organizing. And let's be blunt, because, it's only us. We're in the small, closed-door meeting, smoke-filled, metaphorically speaking. None of the groups that are going to get the foundation funding to do grassroots organizing have any grassroots connections. These are essentially downtown Boston environmental groups. Nothing wrong, and some of them new. Nothing wrong with that. One has to start somewhere. But there is no grassroots constituency yet to absorb that grassroots organizing. It's to come. It's forward-looking, the funding is. The grassroots organizing originates in this room among people sitting here, and has to. And we somewhat earlier identified Middlesex County as a convenient geographic subsegment of the state for the purposes of organizing. We can always, and we need to, move well beyond it. But this struck us as an accessible subsegment because it's kind of nearby. And we know it well. We know most of the cities and towns. But people here are going to have to search out the immediate recipients of that funding and work out some sort of truly collegial way to spend it wisely. I do think the smart focus is on approaching Republican and Democratic town committees. I think your success in approaching Republican town committees may be measured at the outset. But we want to be bipartisan or nonpartisan, as the case may be. We've got to get a number of towns on record. Ideally, we'll be gravitating or moving from Democratic and Republican town committees to town meetings. But the idea is to make sure that 18 months from now, I don't have to say what I mentioned 5 minutes ago, which is that most state reps, most state senators have never had a constituent approach them to say this is the way to go. Very aggressive movement against climate change. That's what climate pricing is all about. Really enlisting all of us equally in pushing back against overconsumption that heats up the earth, but doing so in a fair way that gives each of us a little flexibility at the same time. Doesn't mandate a movement en masse at any given moment, but says basically to us, look, we're either going to pay the true price of carbon with all the secondary effects on the world priced in. We're either going to pay that true price or we're going to find a way to conserve and find a way to move to alternatives. Mark out your own course towards that future. The timing is still in your hands. You can pay the premium or go green when you can afford to do it for your family or for your business. But know that we're going to be engaging in honest pricing and true pricing for those of us who can't move today or choose not to. That's the basic message of the concept, and we really do need a way to take that foundation funding and prioritize towns. I'm not suggesting that it needs to be spent in 351 directions, but we have to come up with a first list of 50, and we have to figure out then how to surface this issue in those 50 so that we start to get real legislative support. Now, in the State House in the last week, we had and now we're talking some fine points of strategy here. We had a meeting, a briefing on two things: the state of the Massachusetts economy, and then the state of the Massachusetts fisc, the state of state government's financial situation. The state economy looks pretty good. That won't surprise you. There are obviously some disturbing gaps in the way that prosperity is spreading, but the overall look is promising, especially for young people, I might add. Our briefer reminded us, and now I'm veering off topic, but when you have 25-year-old kids, twins, you tend to think about this a lot. One of the interesting things about the briefing is that there really is going to be a workforce shortage, that despite the unemployment among young people, in truth, baby boomers are going to start to retire in significant numbers, and there's going to be a demand for young labor. It's going to be exactly the reverse of what millennials have gone through in the last 4 or 5 years. But we have to address the energy question so that they don't have to buy cars in order to get to those jobs. But as I say, I digress. What we've got to do is, the briefing said that the state government situation is worse than the private economy. And that and that you need to couple that with Charlie Baker's commitment against any new taxes. This is where carbon pricing represents has a perfect opening. Because, again, legally, constitutionally, this is not a tax. And Charlie Baker has explicitly said that he has refused to take a position against all new fees. Right? Similar to Bill Weld's position, for whom Governor Weld, of course, was the guy who brought Charlie Baker into government. So we are unlikely to see, absent truly extraordinary situations, any new taxes, which by the way, is itself very regrettable. But the door is open to new non-taxes that accomplish a public purpose, even if the money gets sent back to the consumers. And carbon pricing is perfectly positioned to have a shot in the Baker era to become law. So my message to you, and I'm going to stop because I want to hear it from the other speakers. I also am happy to accept some questions, is one, this foundation funding fuels grassroots organizing but needs grassroots outlets, and people in this room are going to have to get together with whoever has that money, and Zori and Jessica can reference the groups that seem on the brink of getting the money. They need to sit down with you. They need to be in this room with you in the audience to talk about how you all together are going to implement grassroots fundraising. And then the other piece is that once we start moving this through the town committees in some bipartisan or nonpartisan way, and perhaps into some town meetings, we're going to have to approach Governor Baker and say to him, look, you can marshal conservative as well as progressive thinking here. Avoid imposing a tax and get an enormous amount done to fight climate change. So in a word, that's our focus. The bill, of course, inconveniently, the bill that I'm talking about doesn't exist quite yet. But we expect to have a really good working draft by, let's say, the third week of this month, circulating to groups and individuals who express an interest. We're really interested in feedback, not because we expect perfect consensus. There are too many people to ensure that, but because I'm learning and we're learning from the kind of thoughtfulness that you guys have brought to this. A lot of you have been involved in this for ages. I know that. I know how creative and how smart you are about this issue, and I'm trying to encapsulate as much of your good thinking as I can in this legislative vehicle. So with that, I will say thank you, and I don't know if you want to...
I think some questions would be good if there are any questions. But first of all, if anyone has an empty seat next to them, could you raise your hand so we can seat some other people? Please find some seats over here if you'd like. Yeah, why don't we take some questions first?
Sure. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Mike, has Charlie Baker given any indication to you or anybody else in the State House about how he feels about climate change in general? Is he a believer, a denier, and is he receptive, do you think, to carbon pricing?
So there was an environmental debate.
Mike, could you repeat the question for us?
Good question. What is Charlie Baker's current position so far as we can infer it on this stuff? And there was an environmental debate. I know some people here were at it. So you were at it, sorry. So was I. It was Coakley and Baker on environmental questions. The questions were terrific, put to them by groups that are very interested in fighting climate change. And he danced, but no differently than, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, no differently than Martha Coakley danced, which to me is much better than what most candidates for governor on the Republican side nationwide did in the last election. They took very, very strong positions against possibly even the existence of anthropomorphic climate change. Baker's coming from an entirely different place stylistically. So that's point number two. He's obviously an intellectually engaged guy. And it would be even better if he were an intellectually engaged woman, but look. He's another in a long... he's an intellectually engaged person, and he's going to be intrigued by Greg Mankiw. chief economics advisor to Mitt Romney when Mitt last ran for president. For all I know, chief economics advisor to Republican candidate for president Mitt Romney in the future. Mancu's come out in the op-ed pages of the New York Times in favor of carbon pricing. He likes the idea that it's not a top-down governmental mandate. That again, it gives you the choice for your business or for your family in terms of what you do to reduce your carbon footprint and the choice of timing, right? You can continue to pay this penalty, if you will, this true price, or you can go green. Mancu likes that idea. I think Baker's going to be influenced, and Mancu is in Cambridge, so I think that's a good sign, right? And then finally, I read with interest today, and I hadn't known this, that, and this shows you how flexible this guy is in a good way. He opposed the original route of the natural gas pipeline across the top of Massachusetts, the one that has just been changed, right? The fact that he was politically and personally flexible enough to say, hey, now granted, his alternative was to expand the capacity of existing natural gas pipelines, so he's not against increasing supply, but he was saying, look, we don't have to do it in a way that's disruptive or in a way that really flies in the face of public receptivity and public opinion. So you've got a person who I think can be persuaded, is going to be open to persuasion. But he's going to have, as all smart politicians must, I think, he's going to have a little finger in the wind. He's going to want to know that he's tapping into a kind of a grassrootsy sentiment out there. This carbon pricing scheme that we're proposing, as Charlie mentioned, is revenue neutral, which is why it's doesn't meet the legal definition of a tax. Or at least I should say we've decided to make it revenue neutral, in part in order to ensure that it doesn't meet the legal definition of a tax. And that's the way we're going. Pete, yeah.
Yeah, my name is Pete Baldwin. I'm from Winchester. I have spent the last 10 years of my career involved in carbon capture, funded by the U.S. Department of Energy. I was working on a CO2 compressor at a utility scale. I've been involved with all the electric utilities, all the capture process people, and all the demonstration power plants. I love the idea of putting a price on carbon. It's absolutely necessary. I love wind. I love renewables. They're just not quick enough in terms of being able to address the problem. What I don't like about the fee and dividend, or the whatever you want to call it, is that it does not use the money generated to solve the problem. It relies on indirect methods to do that. What I would suggest is that we use a waste disposal fee, which is really what it is. The utilities have mechanisms to figure out what the cost of such things are, and they've all been validated. You use the money to build CO2 pipelines to places like Nebraska or whatever, put it underground, and use the federal government to operate it like a cemetery. And that would be a way to use the money properly. If you give it to the people, they're not going to want to give it back. You don't find anybody in Alaska that wants to give that money back. And they'll want to use more. So I don't see that the mechanisms are in place to do this properly. So,
Thank you.
Unfortunately, carbon capture as an industry is totally dead.
Yeah.
Total another problem. The EPA has fundamentally killed it with their new source performance standards. And unfortunately, we need that in the future, but that's a separate subject.
Thanks, Pete, very much. Yeah, I'm interested in comments. I won't respond to each one, but this is good for me to hear.
Just one last question, and then we need to move
Yeah.
on to the next part.
David.
Yes, Dave Doucette, Marlborough, Massachusetts. To follow his conversation a little bit, firmly believe that you can do a revenue-neutral carbon tax, and it should be done. But actually providing incentives for conservation, renewable, and alternative energy programs can be done in revenue-neutral ways, similar to the Massachusetts Renewable Energy Trust, as well as investments in public transportation and other ways that actually have demonstrable, measurable reductions in carbon dioxide emissions, okay? Which, if you just give the money back to the people, as he said, we don't know how they're going to spend it. And in fact, the poor may become dependent on it. In the same way, in Alaska, they're becoming dependent on those types of taxes. So are you open to, provide the incentives to the carbon tax stick?
So let me offer a comment to both of you, and then I will absent the stage, because I want to hear on the grassroots organizing piece is the most important element of today's meeting. So I'm open to everything. And by the way, once submitting a piece of legislation doesn't freeze it in concrete. The thing, if it moves through the committee process, can be amended at any number of points. And of course, should we not enact carbon pricing in the next 2 years, we're going to be resubmitting for the session after this one.
Can I interrupt for a second? Who are the people along with you submitting this? This is what I'm curious about.
So
Who are your colleagues who care?
Thank you. So the way this works is I'm going to send a dear colleague invitation to House and Senate members to co-sponsor it with me. That's the parliamentary term. We do need you approaching, thank you, that's a great question. We do need you approaching your legislators to ask them to co-sponsor carbon pricing when it comes up. They will hear about it, but they will hear about it at the same time they're hearing about dozens and dozens of other bills. So you need to pop it a little bit up on their radar screens. Let me just say, and I will tell you guys, you got to wrestle sort of with what I'm wrestling with. There has been some polling on carbon pricing. I should mention that British Columbia is revenue neutral, and if you pose the question, let's spend it on good stuff, or let's return it to the taxpayer, but after discouraging their instinct to overconsume, guess which polls the better? And I can tell you that it's not close. So we lose 15 or 20 percentage points if we spend it on good things. We pick up 15 or 20 percentage points, still short of a majority, by the way, today, if we return it to people through a route that doesn't encourage them to re-spend on energy. So, welcome to my world. I'm going to...
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you. I want to end this program promptly at 11, but we have the room until 12. So there's time for people to continue on. Even, yeah, sorry, actually says until 3.
Get pizza, stay all day. Roll our sleeves up.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from Mike is we really got to get organized, and we've got to get out there and approach the town Democratic and Republican committees, and we have to approach our representatives. So how do we do that? And this is what I'd like Jessica Langerman to give us a little briefing about how she's done it and what help can she provide to others who would like to do that. Jessica was one of the founders of Climate Exchange, had some previous names, and one of the things they did, which I think was phenomenal, is they funded the REMI study, which in my mind was absolutely pivotal. So Jessica, could you give us an update on where do we go from here, or how do we do this?
She should express
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Let's see. Charlie, I wonder if I could just grab a table and pull it out to my notes. Thank you so much.
Good thing I moved my coffee from under there.
Oh, God. Thank you. To do that right now. Okay, great. Is Mark Sandine around? Oh, I was just wondering if Mark Sandine... Oh, I'm so nervous that I'm not sure if I can plug this in for that.
Well, Jessica's getting ready. I'm going to start the sign-up sheet around in case you didn't get a chance to sign up. And does anybody not have a name tag? I'll put some of those on here as well.
Okay, let's see. Thank you. Well, my name is Jessica Langerman, and I am, as Charlie mentioned, one of the co-founders of a grassroots organization called Climate Exchange. I am, upstairs. Unlike Senator Barrett, I'm afraid I'm a very nervous speaker, so I hope you will bear with me as I run through this presentation today. But I so appreciated Senator Barrett's comments that we really are the ground zero of organizing. And although I'm from Wellesley, I can tell you that the more I get to know people in Lexington, the more I appreciate that the ground zero really probably is right here in this town. It certainly is with every single person here this morning. So our group did help fund the REMI study. That study was actually primarily funded by a very generous out-of-state donor named Kathy Carruthers.
Excuse me, would you define REMI?
Oh, I certainly will. In fact, that's going to be part of my presentation as well. So REMI stands for Regional Economic Models, Inc. And it is an econometric firm that was founded actually in Amherst, Massachusetts, but now has an office in Washington, D.C. It is now considered one of the premier econometric firms in America, and it is renowned for its work primarily with very conservative industries, fossil fuel industries, oil and gas, nuclear, as well as with municipalities, states, and provinces in Canada. So one of the reasons we hired REMI was because of their very high regard among the conservative community. And I will mention that that study has now been out for over a year. In fact, REMI has now been commissioned to perform other carbon tax studies. California and Washington, along with Massachusetts, have now performed their own studies. And our own Department of Energy Resources just commissioned REMI to perform a study for $150,000 that really fills out the study that we had earlier we had it done last month, March of 2013. So I'm throwing a lot of information out at you, but really what I want to focus on today is a strategy that Senator Barrett has asked us to consider, and that is for each of us here today to think about whether or not we would be willing to approach a Democratic or a Republican town committee to do exactly what he suggested, which is to try to build the political will, citizen by citizen, so that our legislators can realize that this really is an increasing grassroots movement, and that people like you and I are very serious about getting this done. So when Senator Barrett first suggested this to me, I was very nervous. I come from Wellesley, and I didn't know anyone on my Democratic Town Committee. I didn't even know what a Democratic Town Committee was, frankly. I thought it was perhaps a part of the town itself. I didn't realize that it's actually a grassroots volunteer organization and a part of the state Massachusetts Democratic Committee. So I had some educating of myself to do. And one of my first pieces of education actually came from a gentleman named John Carlton-Foss, who is right here in the audience today. John is very active with the Massachusetts Democratic Party, and he helped to develop their platform at their most recent convention. And thanks to John's efforts, part of the Massachusetts Democratic Party platform, which I have right here, this is the climate crisis section, includes a statement that they endorse putting a price on carbon using a tax, a cap-and-trade system, or some other mechanism. So this is a very powerful document that you can begin with when you think about approaching a member of your Democratic or Republican town, well, in this case, the Democratic Town Committee. So let's see. The task was upon me to do this, and now I'm going to kind of walk through how I went about it. Afterwards, Zori Zimmerman, another member of Climate Exchange, and I will help talk about, in more concrete terms, how we can strategize what town committees to approach and when. We'll do that with Senator Barrett's help. So here we go. So the first thing that we really need to do, or that you would need to do if you were interested in doing this, is to begin by approaching members of your town's sustainability groups. You might want to invite one or two to coffee and explain Senator Barrett's bill and the fact that the Massachusetts Democratic Party has already endorsed a carbon tax as part of its platform. You might show them that document, and you might then also show them the Wellesley Democratic Town Committee press release endorsing revenue-neutral carbon tax, specifically Senator Barrett's bill. So you have two good things to start with, this platform piece and also this press release from Wellesley showing that you are not the first person to suggest this, that other Democratic Town Committees are already taking steps on this. And thanks to Bob Walkegan, he was just successful in getting the town of Carlisle's Democratic Town Committee to endorse a carbon tax formally. So I'll show you the kind of endorsement that we're looking for, the exact type of thing in just a moment. But your best bet is to begin by building relationships with other prominent environmentalists in your town. Best case scenario, some of those environmentalists actually serve on the Democratic Town Committee. All right, so with their buy-in, they might be willing to help you approach your town committee, and then it is up to you to contact the head of that committee. And what you would do is explain, well, what we are suggesting, one way that you could proceed is to say that you represent a group called Climate Exchange, which is our group, where our purpose is to help build the political will to enact revenue-neutral carbon tax legislation here in Massachusetts. We are nothing but volunteers, except that's really not true because, as Senator Barrett mentioned, we have just garnered significant, really quite stunning funding from 2 organizations, both of them out of Massachusetts, who have been watching the political will build here for a carbon tax and who are now getting serious about putting some money in the game. So Climate Exchange is now actually going to be hiring, and we are really ramping up as a real nonprofit. At any rate, we're looking for volunteers, like everyone here in this room, and what you might do is say to the president of the Democratic Town Committee, hello, my name is so-and-so. I'd like to talk to you about the possibility of presenting a proposal to your DTC. You may be aware that the Massachusetts Democratic Party endorsed the concept of a carbon tax as part of its platform in 2013, and now State Senator Mike Barrett is drafting carbon tax legislation for Massachusetts, and I'd like the opportunity to talk to the DTC to see if you would be interested in formally supporting this proposal. The Wellesley DTC was the first to do so, and we're hoping to gain the approval of every DTC in the state. Senator Barrett would be happy to come and speak on the subject, and he is your best weapon here. Is there an upcoming meeting when it might be convenient to have such a presentation? You'll need about 15 minutes to present. And during the course of this conversation, you'll want to try to assess how well this person understands the whole concept of a carbon tax, and if he thinks that the group itself could use kind of a primer on the subject first. Then you'll want to decide, do you want to just go in there and speak informally or formally, or do you want to have a slide presentation? Kind of the way you're going to make this presentation is up to you. Bob, I'd like to give you a moment to talk about how you did it. Next, what you'll do is you'll set a date with this gentleman's office here, talking to Brendan, probably, who is in the audience here, right there, and to see if you can actually coordinate the date of the DTC meeting that you'll be speaking at, preferably with Senator Barrett himself, or if not, with someone from Climate Exchange like me, who would be more than happy to go with you. Another person who is more than willing to talk on this subject is Mark Breslow. He has been involved with the Department of Energy Resources study by Remy that I was just mentioning. He's an expert, and the facts and figures I'm going to show you in a moment come from him. Having Mark at your side is fabulous because he can really help answer difficult, intimidating questions. So when the big day arrives, you are going to want to bring as much supporting documentation as you can, such as a hard copy of the draft DOER report, the Massachusetts REMI report, which is online at the Climate Exchange website. It's also online if you Google REMI. And you can bring in, if you like, for example, Senator Barrett was talking about Professor Greg Mankiw of Harvard, who has published articles in the New York Times. You might consider bringing in articles such as his, and all of these, again, are accessible at the Climate Exchange website. You'll want to bring in this platform proposal and the Wellesley press release, as much documentation as you can to help yourself feel more official and supported by this. All right, then the big moment comes, and you're going to be arriving with, perhaps with Mark, perhaps with Senator Barrett at the DTC meeting. If you are like me, you will be a bundle of nerves and barely able to speak. I didn't think to do a slideshow. I just brought, nervously, my own papers to kind of speak from. And what happened was it really looked just like this, and I was sort of the lady on the upper left there, nervously waiting as the group passed out its agenda. I had been given about 15 minutes to speak. As it turned out, To my surprise, I actually did know a couple of people who were on the DTC. I didn't know they were on the DTC. They were just acquaintances of mine, but that kind of helped break the ice a little bit. So I wasn't really sure how to begin. It's very difficult to assess a group like this right off the bat. I didn't have the foresight to ask in advance if people knew about a carbon tax, so I had to ask right then. So I said something to the effect of, are people here familiar with the idea of a carbon tax, a sin tax, or a Pigouvian tax? And most people shook their heads no. So I kind of had to go back to the beginning and describe the basic idea. So, what do you say? Well, basically you want to remind your audience of the relationship between this and this. If you are at a Democratic town committee, this will not be a problem because everyone already knows this. You want to then establish the relationship between this, your paycheck stub, and this, which is the leap that most people need to make. You're going to ask, have you ever wondered who pays for the damage caused by fossil fuels? I tend to avoid the words climate change or global warming, even among Democrats, because why go there? So I focus on concrete things like oil spills and health. Here in Massachusetts, we have, I think it's the 4th worst asthma among children in the nation, and that is partially due to the particulate matter in our air. So the fact there is a strong correlation between health and particulate matter. Particulate matter is also correlated with CO2. So the more CO2 you have, the more particulate matter you tend to have. So anyway, mention something like that and then say, for example, somebody had to fund this cleanup. This is the Horizon oil spill. And what most of us don't realize is it's us, right? We're funding it. We're just not paying for it here. Instead, we're paying for it here. And we will continue to pay there, okay, until, as long as this price does not reflect the damage that this product causes. So then I explained that this is called a negative cost externality. Should read that. Kind of try to have maybe a discussion about what it kind of means to externalize a cost. So then you can talk about how we have this artificial break between the artificially cheap cost of gas and the price that people are actually unknowingly already paying for that, and how it deprives us of the ability to avoid unnecessary costs. This is a strong argument for Republicans. Okay, so again, obviously this commodity causes expensive problems. So I talk about how, for me, I was reading a book called The Climate War by Eric Pooley, and I stumbled across this statement. And this is a take on Sir Nicholas Stern, who was the head of the World Bank some years ago. He said that the worst market failure in history is global warming. But again, this will probably be new to the people that you are talking to. So I actually went and kind of discussed the idea of a Pigouvian tax. And I told the story about how back in the 1800s, there was a British economist named Arthur Pigou who noticed that the steam engines at the time passing through the English countryside were emitting burning chunks of coal from their smokestacks. Those pieces of coal would then set fire to the countryside, burning down crops and farmhouses. So the people who had to pay for this, surprise, surprise, were actually the farmers themselves. They had to drop whatever they were doing and run out and try to put out those fires. No one from the railways were compensating them for the damage, for their lost time or damage to their properties. So this man, Arthur Pigou, came up with really a brilliant solution. He proposed that the government quantify the damage that the railroads were doing and then tax them that amount. But instead of putting the funds into the general treasury, they would be kept aside and distributed to the farmers who were suffering from the railroad's actions. So his scheme looked like this. There's the negative externality that had never been quantified. The government actually put a price on it, and then they took those funds and used them to compensate the farmers, which had the result of forcing the railways to improve their technology to stop emitting those embers from burning down the fields, which, lo and behold, immediately they did. Once they had to pay for it, that technology immediately surfaced. So the problem was solved. Now today what Nicholas Stern and Eric Cooley and others are suggesting is that we have this terrible similar problem. We have a very extreme negative externality that has never been quantified. We need to quantify that by putting a price on carbon. People have suggested, for example, we begin by, well, maybe I should begin by saying that we know how much CO2 is emitted by every fossil fuel. We actually can quantify it, and we can put a price on that number. We could then use the funds to compensate people. I probably should have put a different picture here rather than the little girl with the asthma. But what we're really proposing compensating people for is the rise in energy prices that they will be facing. So people will obviously need help in dealing with that. But what this will do, what this will have the result of doing, is it will finally level the playing field between the fossil fuel industry and renewables, and it'll ignite a clean energy revolution in which there's finally a real market for clean technology. And people will have a choice then. Do they want to continue to actually pay the price of increasingly rising fossil fuels, or do they want to keep that money and perhaps invest it in clean energy technology and avoid paying the tax, which is another very appealing argument for Republicans. So as Senator Barrett often says, this is a tax that we actually want people to avoid. All right, so the proposal is, what if we began slowly reducing this so that all of us had more here in our paychecks while we commensurately raised this, and it would include all fossil fuels, not just gasoline. Commensurately is the key word. We would raise the price of fossil fuels gradually and proportionally to the decrease in other taxes. Or, rather than decrease other taxes, we could offer cash refunds. There are all different ways in which such a tax or rebate scheme could be designed. So in taxation terms, that's called revenue neutrality. Again, this is a concept you'll want to teach people at whatever DTC you're at. You can explain that economists from both sides of the political spectrum support this. We have very liberal economists with whom you're probably familiar, and then we have very conservative economists, including Gregory Mankiw of Harvard, right here, Larry Summers.
George Schultz.
And George Schultz on the liberal side. You can also say that this is... Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. You can also say that this is not just a wild idea that we're plucking out of the air. This idea has already been implemented in national and subnational jurisdictions all over the world. The World Bank, in fact, just released a report on that. I think it's 32 national and subnational jurisdictions already have carbon pricing of some kind, either a carbon tax, cap and trade, or some combination of the two. Including in British Columbia, which is one of the most successful models of carbon taxation known, and their province operates somewhat similarly to an American state. So we have been using it as one of the ways in which we're studying how we would implement such a tax here. And as you can see, the emissions have gone down, and the economy has not only not been harmed, but it's actually, the GDP has actually improved in British Columbia. Yes, Dave?
One thing about this graph, which is somewhat deceptive, is that the British Columbia carbon tax is more part of a broader energy plan. Like, they spent $1.6 billion in public transportation, and they provide $6,000 in incentives to take gas guzzlers off the road and replace them with more efficiency models. And that is not being funded by the carbon tax. But that type of graph shows that, oh, the carbon tax did it, and not take into account the broader picture of what's going on in the carbon.
That's a good point.
Okay.
Because it is more complex legislation than that. They also did something really remarkably clever, which is that they had a surplus in their treasury before they implemented the tax. And so they actually began by issuing every man, woman, and child in BC a $100 rebate check in the mail. So that was in their mailboxes the week before the carbon tax was implemented. So they did all kinds of psychological warfare. They do not have a denial problem in BC the way we do here. So, for example, I've read summaries by their business council. The council itself says that they know that global warming is an anthropogenic problem, that it must be solved, that the business community is responsible for taking part in that solution. So it's a very different atmosphere there. But Dave is right. I know that there are other tax incentives and that the legislation, there's other legislation.
But we've done that here as well.
But-
We're good spenders on
That's
companion pieces. This is the missing piece.
That's really true. Thank
But
you.
to give the credit to the carbon tax
Good point.
is not appropriate.
Yes.
That's
Thank
my
you.
point.
I'm not sure. Well, okay, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. So here are our two fabulous legislators who have already introduced carbon tax legislation. And again, this will probably take your audience by surprise because not many people know that here in Massachusetts we actually have legislators who have already introduced carbon tax legislation. In fact, this is the bill that they submitted back in January of 2013. It was H2532, an act relative to, Sam, where are you? An act relative to,
Tom wrote that one.
oh, did he? Listen, do sing.
Shifting from carbon emissions to
That's it, to transportation investment. Because at the time, this was not going to be a revenue neutral bill, or it was going to be primarily non-revenue neutral. And the author of that bill is standing right there, the tall gentleman in the back. This is Sam Anderson, who was Tom Conroy's aide back when this was being written, and who now is with Senator Barrett's office. So, what I did then was I discussed the origins of climate exchange and how we were just a group of people who, once we heard about this legislation, decided that what Senator Barrett probably most needed was a study to determine whether or not this legislation was feasible. So with the help of this energy economist in Washington State, we settled on REMI as what we thought would be the most outstanding and unbiased econometric firm to do an analysis of his legislation. REMI's findings were truly remarkable. I'm trying to think if they wrote this study. Again, this is on the Climate Exchange webpage. And this study showed that if the legislation were done exactly as Sam had originally drafted it, not only could we significantly reduce emissions in the state, we could actually raise our GDP. I was going to say kind of without significant impact on the poor, but we were not completely satisfied with that. We felt that this model that Remy was showing was really, perhaps we could improve it so that the lower income households could do better than they did in the Remy model. So for details on this study, I encourage you to go to Climate Exchange website. That study was presented by the lead economist, Scott Nystrom, at the State House in July of 2013. When I asked Senator Barrett how many copies I should bring of the Remy study, he said, well, it's July 17th. He said, I think I would bring 20, and let's hope for the best, that we get 20 people in this hearing room. Well, that day, we got 120. We had to lock 30 people out of the room for fire safety reasons. In fact, I have a friend who was working on another floor of the State House. There was some other news breaking that day that everyone was concerned on, and he said that people came running up from upstairs and said, have you heard about what's going on downstairs? There's some sort of carbon tax study. It's like the room is packed. What's going on? And my friend said it really shook the building. No one expected this. So that was very exciting. It also hit the front page of the Boston Globe. So again, when you approach a DTC, you have a lot of weaponry behind you, a lot of data, and a lot of history already of people who are really serious about this proposal. Then the Department of Energy Resources decided to hire Remy to do a more comprehensive study. And we have their preliminary findings right now. We don't have yet the full study. But this is how the tax would be designed. I'll let you read that. What would you say? This is how the tax could be designed. This is one of the more, one of the ways in which they are suggesting might be best. So households as a whole would get back the amount of the tax that they put in. Businesses and institutions as a whole would get back what they put in. And as for the household sector, every person would get the same rebate, and business and institutions would get money back in proportion to their share of total employment in the state, which is a slightly different model than we had with the first REMI study.
Just a quick
Yeah.
question for clarification, not to derail this, but
No.
what I'm missing is what are the ideas for where the fee itself would be levied? Like, what's the point of?
Okay, so I always say the first.
We can, it's been a lively topic of discussion. Massachusetts doesn't have a lot of upstream extraction or refining, so we can't move it as much upstream as some would like. That said, right now, we're trying to locate it as far upstream as we can, which probably means distribution in Massachusetts. And an additional question, and we don't have to discuss it today, but it's one I'd love feedback on, is how visible the price has to be to the ultimate consumer in order for it to be effective. Counterintuitively, many economists feel that transparency and visibility is not important, that price alone drives the decision to consume less. But we don't have to, so we're trying to drive it upstream, but in Massachusetts, beggars cannot be choosers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
One more thing as far as the design of the tax. This was kind of assuming that the price of fossil fuels was on an increasing trend, which was true until the summer of this year. Since then, the price of a barrel of oil has gone from $105 a barrel down to below 80, and there's serious conversation about the price of a barrel of oil to go down into the 30s next year. When you're talking about a carbon tax of $35 a ton, give or take, that's like between the 5 and 20% impact on price. So if the idea is you're only increasing you're trying to reduce emissions just by increasing the price of the fuel, it's already dropped enough to cover anything that would happen with the carbon tax. So, basically, the stuff is much cheaper now than it was when this was originally proposed a year or two ago.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to ask us to hold the questions now so that we can end at 11, but then we'll have time to discuss it more after that.
Okay, thank you. We have some experts in this room that I think would be happy to talk about these questions. Very quickly, again, this is the basic carbon tax and rebate proposal, which could, their findings show, create over 10,000 jobs by 2025, increase real personal income in Massachusetts by over $2 billion. This should be another bullet point. Cut emissions by over 6 million metric tons per year, while keeping safe the bottom 80% of households, which would come out ahead or even under this model, and the top 20% of households would come out only $120, give or take, about a year on average. So that is pretty remarkable. And the greatest job growth will be in sectors such as healthcare, real estate, finance, and construction, all of which are very strong in Massachusetts. Here are some graphs from the preliminary findings. Okay. And again, this is per a year, an annual summary. This is the business and institution impact. So you can see the employment gains. And by the way, I have copies of this on that table over there, along with copies of the Wellesley press release and the Massachusetts Democratic Committee stuff. So you will want to take this into your meeting with you. Emissions reductions. Okay, so we don't have to choose between a healthy economy and a healthy environment. We can have both, and this is our bottom message. So it is time to align our economy with our values, to reward work and investment, and to, someone told me that it's disincent, not disincentivize. I just learned that this morning on NPR, actually. So I should say disincent pollution. In other words, we can choose this instead of this. And we can choose this instead of this. And once Massachusetts, as has been said, demonstrates to the world that a carbon tax would not only decrease emissions but benefit the economy, other states will follow. And catastrophes like this will become less frequent because demand for this product will decrease. The market for renewable energy will finally be able to compete against subsidized fossil fuels, and it will take off. And this little girl, along with thousands of children like her, will start to get better. So the nation has followed us before. I don't know if you guys. Massachusetts was the first state in the nation to free its slaves. I thought it was Vermont, but it was actually Massachusetts long before the Civil War. And this is a picture of the brave 54th Massachusetts Regiment of African Americans who fought valiantly in the Civil War. As you know, more recently, first to establish universal health care, to legalize same-sex unions, other Massachusetts firsts, first free public school, first free library. None of this was easy, right? And so now here's where we need to begin. We need to get other press releases, other Democratic town committees across the state to support Senator Barrett's legislation so that he can take their support to his fellow legislators and say, look, this is the kind of support that I'm building. Okay, so here's the exact proposal that we are bringing to these committees.
And we'll soon be updating this to reflect, the new iteration.
Fantastic. Okay, and again, I have this on the table over there.
Actually, Jessica, you don't, so you might want to give people, they're all gone.
Oh, they're all done.
Give us your names, we will get one.
Yeah, if you sign the sign-in sheet, we will send all this documentation and links to everyone. Okay, so if you are interested in pursuing outreach to your local DTC, if you would be so kind as to go to their website and call them, find out when the next opportunity is to get a brief presentation on the topic on their agenda, and let us know, Zori and I, at Climate Exchange, of your success. So due to the election, probably many DTCs will not be meeting for months. So to help Senator Barrett build support for the legislation, we suggest that you try to get this on the agenda for the first available date. And those of you who start right away might be able to schedule Senator Barrett to make the presentation himself. Right, Senator Barrett? Also, many DTCs will be having holiday gatherings in the next month, and asking if you could attend one could be a fun way to get to know members of the DTC before pitching the legislation to them at a subsequent meeting. All right, so now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Zori, who we're going to, or to Charlie a little bit. All right, we just would like to talk about concrete ways about how we can do this.
That was a fabulous presentation. I've never seen it presented that way, and I think it was really great. So I think one of the key things to talk about later is how do we get copies of this, and again, more of the specifics that you can do. And also, maybe at the end you can talk about what other communities have done, how many other people. But Zori, if you could now guide us through some of the strategies to implementing this and building this support. Zori Zimmerman was also one of the co-founders of Climate Exchange and is leading the Citizens Climate Lobby. And maybe either now or at the end you can talk a little bit more about those organizations for people who aren't familiar with them. Thank you.
I think Jessica gave us a great start to this. And we've got a list of about 25 communities with people identified already to start to reach out to DTCs, some of which have done something, some of which haven't done much. So come see me and let's get you signed up if you're interested in approaching your particular town, because we really want to ramp this up. In Lexington, we're on our third meeting with the Democratic Town Committee, but we hope at the next meeting we will actually have it passed. And then we will have 3 towns. And as we hear from you that your committee has passed it, we will circulate the information so everyone going forward will have the longer and longer list. And I understand from Mike that he wants us to start with DTCs. Once we have a certain number of them, then maybe start approaching the town committees, the town meetings.
Or the city councils. Republican town committees would be fine as well if you can find a taker. That would be fantastic.
But one question for you is, do you want us to hold off on reaching out to the actual representatives?
To the town meetings?
No, to the State House, until we have a certain number of DTCs,
no, it can be
simultaneously.
You're absolutely right. It can be simultaneous. Your approach to the state reps and state senators will work, I think, in many cases, even if you haven't done the town committee piece. So feel free But that certainly, a town committee endorsement, on the other hand, will certainly give you added
Great.
momentum.
Great. Separately, I presume that many of you are business people as well, and I'm also heading up a grassroots business leaders movement to have business support, build business support for this bill as well. If you're interested in that, please also let me know. And then broadening it even more, Jessica and I also lead a local chapter of a group called Citizens Climate Lobby, who has worked for the last 7 years to have a national carbon fee and rebate proposal accepted. And Jessica will talk later this afternoon, if you stay on, about her experience recently lobbying in the federal building with federal representatives and senators, members of Congress as we call them, and also the REMI study for the nation was done, looking at a tax for a fee for the entire country, which is also very positive in all the economic metrics, as well as reducing emissions. And Scott Nystrom, the same modeler for our state REMI report, did a presentation, closed doors to both members of the House and members of the Senate. And we are told that there were quite a few Republicans that attended this, who were very, very interested, and Jessica was there. So we're also pushing this on the federal level, but Massachusetts, I think, will be the impetus to finally get to the tipping point. So if you're interested in working on the federal level, as well as the state level, let us know. We try to cover it all. So.
Thank you.
Questions?
So I thought we have 6 minutes left for the formal part, but I thought one of the reasons we prepared the signs is we thought those of you who want to stay on, we can hold up the Arlington sign, and those folks from Arlington who want to get together and start planning, we can actually start doing that in this room today with the experts in the room here with Jessica and Senator Barrett and Zori to think about what do we need and what do we have to ask them to help us with. So it's really now, how do we get started and how do we start moving this forward, and what's the help that we can get from you guys. But let's open it up to some questions now for the group. Okay.
I have a question for you guys and for Mike. I think we need to settle on one word that we're talking about, because if we talk about taxes to one group and fees to another, it's not consistent. And I think there was so much opposition to the gas tax on the referendum, and this sounds like a gas tax to people. So they say we already have gas taxes. I've had that reaction. So I wonder if, we could get together and use the same terms, because I think it would help people understand it better. And I'm not saying which term, but wherever Mike is.
Or Jessica, do you have a recommendation?
I was just going to say, I think, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the DOER study refers to it as fee and rebate now.
My own preference would be, we don't have to, I'm uneasy with dividend. Some folks use fee and dividend. I think dividend smacks of a different, a financial subset of the population receives dividends from its stock investments, and I'm uneasy about going with the term fee, and I would just go with fee. But although we are in fact taking a fee and rebate approach, I want to be sensitive to the good points made in this room, arguing for our setting aside some of the money for other purposes. So it could be fee and rebate, but really for me it's carbon pricing and carbon fee. I should tell you that as of this week, we're also considering whether we have to take some portion of the money to pay for the cost of administering the system itself. Mention was made of the fact that British Columbia sequestered enough money to send money back in advance, which is very potentially appealing. So for all that, I could imagine our only returning 90% to the public and keeping arbitrarily 10% for administration and for ongoing funding of rebates. So you decide, or help us decide, whether fee and rebate is preferable to fee. For the moment, I'm settled on carbon pricing or carbon fee.
So,
Mark, yeah?
yes, in your talk, I thought you had said an honest and fair price on carbon.
Oh, that's a good
And I like that a lot. So I think, that positions it fairly and.
Fair
honestly,
pricing is a good,
An honest and fair price on carbon is what you said.
Fair
And
price,
I- and I
fair
really
price.
like that.
Words count.
Yeah.
Words count.
well, thank you. That's good reinforcement.
Yes.
Hi, Alana Zamaro from Carlisle. First of all, very happy to see this room so filled. Couple of things. Mike, you talked about a coalition that's forming, and I've actually been tracking the coalitions involved with some of the groups. And that is not just environmental groups, it's also businesses, CALC, which now is in the name, I didn't get the acronym of the business thing. It was CALC, but they changed the name.
Coalition.
Whatever, but bottom line, it's a business coalition, thank you, Story, and also E2, but it's also labor and social justice movements. And each of those groups have huge outreach in terms of membership and grassroots, which is what this is all about. So one quick question is, and you alluded to, we've got to find out who those groups are so that we can have some influence on the money and the way it's being spent. And I'm wondering what kind of plan is being developed so that we can work together. One of the things I'm really concerned about is if we have divergent groups. I know that this coalition does have funding already, and some of that funding is going to go into polling and surveys and focus groups to determine what applies with the public in terms of a name. So how are we going to work together so we don't look like disparate groups? I think that is really critical. The other thing that I want to bring up is the person who talked about British Columbia and the energy plan. It's part of a carbon tax or fee, or whatever we're calling it, is part of a broader plan. And you mentioned rightly that we have other pieces in place here in Massachusetts, one of which is the Global Warming Solution Act. And some feel that there is a way to build this into the Global Warming Solution Act. But what I would like to know is, when do we start looking at a bigger picture in terms of what's happening now, okay, with regard to prices going down for oil? What's the impact of that on this fight? It's got to be factored in. The Global Warming Solution Act, and how we show the big picture of all the different pieces that are in play, what's missing, and why this would fill the bill. So it's a large, complicated.
Well, I think that is such an important point, because if we're going to go to the Town Democratic Town Committee, we want to go with the labor groups. We want to go with the businesses.
Social justice.
We all want to bring them together in a coordinated effort. So really, it's up to us to figure out how do we work together. Okay? I mean, no one else is going to do it for us so we've got to do it. So maybe as part of this, those people who are from different groups in MCAN, I think, should be really critical in this. Yes?
So, Lana, as you know, Climate Exchange, this is our primary mission, really, is to bring all of these groups together. And part of the problem right now is that we have been working as volunteers, stretched to the limit. And we have just received funding that's larger than our dreams. And that funding has been given to us on the condition, really, that we form a coalition with other major environmental players in Massachusetts. That coalition is being formed as we speak, but the people who are forming it are unpaid. They all work second jobs. They work 100 hours a week. And so we are in a, so this is not quite yet our coalesced moment.
So you're not referring to the group that I was referring to, which is
To
already...
Are you talking about CABA?
I'm talking about a pretty powerful group, a coalition of some very powerful organizations and individuals who are already working, and these are the people who are getting the money.
Well, I think that's
The Mass Carbon Pricing Campaign Coalition, I think is the current name.
That's who it is, Lana.
It's just forming. It's just
Yeah, it's us. It's all the environmental groups. That's who it is. So Cindy Lupie is the woman who is being chosen to head that up right now. But as the funding comes in and the hiring begins, we'll see what that begins to look like.
That's all.
So could you please tell us how much money you've gotten? I don't want to say that because I just heard yesterday. I don't want to say the exact fund figure.
Jessica, we've outlined a strategy here today.
Yes.
And we want to bring as many groups together doing that strategy. So then would it be carbon exchange that would set up a
Yes.
follow-up meeting
Yes.
with the leaders so that what we...
Sorry, it's called and I should
Climate
say
exchange.
that again. Here it's right.
That climate exchange will set up a meeting then to sort of bring groups similar to Sustainable Middlesex and MCAN and
Yes.
Mothers Out Front and everyone who wants to do this
So
so
all
we
the
can
groups that you
coordinate it.
just mentioned are part of this coalition.
Great.
We have Mothers Out Front, we've got Conservation Law Foundation, we've got 350MA, Sierra Club, I'm trying to think of Clean Water Action. Some of these, we've got CAVA. Some of these groups have been with us from the beginning. Some are brand new with this arrival of this funding. Sorry, let me get to the climate exchange.
So if we can coordinate the strategy with the other groups, I think it'll make it much
Yeah, so we
much
want to, but I ask your patience because it's just coming together now. Okay, so the people behind this webpage, they're like 4 unpaid volunteers, really. So it'll take us a while to return your emails, and but give us time because we are ramping up.
Great.
Somebody please take food, I don't want to take it.
Fran has an announcement.
So one of the players, small but important, in terms of grassroots, is Mass Interfaith Power and Light.
Thank you, should have said that.
But
Thank you,
Just
Fran.
an example of, the broad reach. And I just want to mention that they also are helping to co-sponsor something called Light for Lima, which is a global vigil going from the local to the global on Sunday night at 5 o'clock at Faneuil Hall. So if you're interested in that, we know that we have the climate conference, the UN climate conference in Lima. This is another approach. We've got to do everything. So anyhow, if you're interested in that, there's posters on the door, and I'll be glad to let you know more about that.
Thank you.
Are there questions in the group? Okay. If people want to stay and hold up a sign for their town and start thinking about how to move it, feel free to grab that and use the room to start organizing. And thank you all for coming. It's been a great evening.